your own father, standing at the head of the dinner table, raising a glass not to honor you, but to humiliate you. In front of family, friends, business partners, he calls you a failure, worthless, unlovable without a husband. But what he doesn't know is that tonight, the silence he mocked is about to destroy him. This is not just a family dinner. It's a battlefield. Stay with me, because the storm that's coming will leave everyone at that table shattered. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you don't, drop a comment with the number 6. Either way, I promise, you won't look at family the same after this. The mahogany dining table stretched across the Hayes family's formal dining room like a battlefield polished to perfection. 16 place settings glimmered under the weight of crystal glassware and silver cutlery, each spot carefully arranged as if the symmetry itself could hold together the tension in the air. But nothing could. Not tonight. I sat in my assigned chair 3 seats down on the left, strategically placed so I could be ignored but never truly absent. That was the way my father, Richard Hayes, orchestrated these dinners. To him, family gatherings weren't about connection. They were a stage. And tonight, I was the unwilling actor he had chosen for humiliation. The October air carried the faint scent of roasted lamb mixed with his cologne, sharp and suffocating. My mother, Elaine, moved between the kitchen and the dining room like a ghost, silent, efficient, never resting. Even when she pulled out her chair, she would rise again within seconds, rushing to refill a glass or serve another dish. She had perfected invisibility after 30 years of marriage. "Elaine, the wine," my father barked, though his glass was still half full. She appeared instantly, bottle already in hand. Her eyes never lifted, as though eye contact might ignite his temper. Across from him sat my cousin, Lauren Pierce, glowing with the smugness of newlywed satisfaction. Her husband, Brandon, a young lawyer with a smug smile of his own, kept glancing around the table as if this entire dinner were a courtroom and he was preparing to win by association. The Harringtons, my father's oldest business friends, sat near the far end, murmuring quietly. 3 of his associates, Collins, Edwards, and Shaw, occupied the remaining seats, their wives nodding politely to conversations they didn't care about. Then there was Victoria Campbell, my father's sister, perched to his right like a queen regent, her judgmental eyes scanning the table as if daring someone to slip up. She thrived on gossip, and tonight she looked ravenous. I knew something was coming. My father's laugh was already louder than usual, his words slurred just enough. 3 whiskeys in, Richard Hayes was ready to perform. "So, Juliana," Aunt Victoria's voice sliced through the chatter, polished and cruel. "Is there any special someone we should know about? You're not getting any younger, dear." The room hushed slightly. Forks paused midair. I felt the familiar burn rise in my chest, but I steadied my voice. "I'm focused on my career right now." "Why?" Lauren's laugh rang out like glass shattering. She lifted her left hand, the diamond on her finger catching the chandelier's light. "Oh, come on, Jules. You've been saying that for years. Look at me, I've managed to balance both, a career and a husband." She leaned into Brandon with rehearsed adoration. "Some of us can have it all." Karen Harrington tried to redirect with a polite compliment about Lauren's ring, but my father leaned forward, eyes narrowing on me. The glint in them was familiar, a dangerous mixture of arrogance and cruelty. "Lauren understands priorities," he declared, raising his glass toward her. 28 years old, already building a future. A husband, a home, children soon, I'm sure. That's what real success looks like. My mother's hand trembled as she set down a serving dish. She didn't look at me. She never did when he began. "And then we have Juliana," my father continued, his voice booming with the performative tone he used in boardrooms. "She thinks a laptop can keep her warm at night. She thinks job titles mean something when she comes home to an empty apartment." "Richard," Bill Harrington said softly, but my father was already on his feet, glass in hand, towering over us all. No, let me finish. This is about family legacy." His eyes locked onto mine. I saw it the sadistic satisfaction he took in my humiliation. "So tell me, Juliana." His words dripped with venom. "How does it feel to be the only failure at this table?" The silence was suffocating. Then, as if on cue, nervous laughter rippled around. Lauren giggled behind her napkin, Brandon smirked into his wine, and even Aunt Victoria's lips twitched with cruel amusement. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father announced grandly, "let me properly introduce my daughter. 30 years old, single, clinging to spreadsheets and conference calls. No husband, no children, just meaningless work." The laughter grew louder. My mother stood frozen by the kitchen door, eyes glassy with shame. "It's not meaningless," I whispered, my voice quiet but firm. "What was that?" He cupped his ear mockingly. "Did the spinster say something?" "Richard, please," my mother whispered. "No, Elaine, she needs to hear this." He waved her off. "All those years of expensive schools, the best opportunities, and what do we have? Nothing." Lauren figured it out. She's younger, smarter, prettier. But Juliana? 30 and alone. That's not success, sweetheart. That's pathetic. The associates shifted uncomfortably. Bill Harrington cleared his throat, but no one came to my defense. They never did. I gripped my phone under the table, the weight of the manila folder against my leg like a secret weapon waiting to be drawn. 7 months of preparation, 7 months of silence. Richard Hayes raised his glass once more. To real success. To family values. To knowing what truly matters. Glasses clinked all around me, everyone except me. As crystal rang under the chandelier, my mind wandered back to the first time he dismissed me at 12 years old with, "Good grades won't get you a husband." Back to 16, when I won the state math competition only to hear, "Compensating for not being pretty enough." Back to Northwestern, to Wharton, to every milestone twisted into an insult. Each memory burned like coal, each humiliation another ember feeding the fire. "Juliana," my father barked, dragging me back. "Stand and toast your cousin. Show respect for someone who actually understands success." I glanced at my mother. She stood at the edge of the room, eyes pleading. "Please," she mouthed silently, her fingers trembling. And in her fear, I saw something I had never truly acknowledged before. She wasn't just submissive. She was terrified. That realization struck deeper than any insult. Because if my mother, Elaine Hayes, the woman who had once sung me to sleep, was this broken, then how many years had I been blind to the truth? For the first time that night, I smiled. A small, cold smile. Because Richard Hayes had no idea that the quietest one at the table wasn't weak. She was waiting, and soon he would learn just how dangerous silence could be. The sound of clinking crystal lingered in the air long after the laughter faded, a cruel echo that seemed to mock me with every second that passed. My father's words still hung heavy, wrapping themselves around my chest like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. I kept my expression calm, my fingers resting against the base of my water glass, but inside me a storm raged, one that had been building for years, one that refused to die quietly tonight. Memories rose unbidden, sharp as broken glass. I was 12 when I raced home, clutching a report card filled with straight A's, my heart pounding with pride. Richard Hayes barely looked at it before saying, "Good grades don't find you a husband, Juliana." I was 16 when I stood on stage accepting the state mathematics trophy, the crowd cheering, my name printed in bold across the local paper. He laughed in front of neighbors, saying, "She's compensating for not being pretty enough." When I earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, he brushed it off as a waste. "She'll quit when she finds a man. That's how it works." Wharton, the MBA I clawed my way through with debt and sleepless nights, was dismissed with a smirk. Degrees don't rock a cradle. Every success I fought for was turned into evidence of my failure as a woman. The final blow came 2 years ago, when he tried to barter me off to his partner's son, a chinless coward who thought women should retire the day they married. I refused. That was the day I stopped being his brilliant daughter. I became his shame. The black mark on the Hayes legacy. And tonight, in front of everyone, he wanted me to kneel under that shame. I lifted my eyes from the glass and looked around the table. Lauren's smile was smug, her diamond ring catching the chandelier light as if mocking me with every flash. Brandon sat back in his chair, grinning, satisfied to watch me sink under my father's words. Aunt Victoria's smirk was razor-sharp, delighted to witness the spectacle. Even the Harringtons, who had known me since childhood, said nothing. Karen avoided my eyes, but Bill kept silent, lips pressed together, unwilling to challenge Richard Hayes. His 3 associates stared intently at their lamb as though the meat could reveal the secrets of the universe. No one spoke for me. No one ever did. And then there was my mother. Elaine stood by the doorway, her hands clenched around a napkin, her face pale. She moved toward me, her fingers brushing my sleeve, her whisper so fragile I almost didn't hear it. "Please, Juliana, don't make him angry. Just apologize. You know how he gets when money is involved." Money. Always money. I thought of the way she flinched when he mentioned bank accounts, how she never wore jewelry anymore, not even the pearl necklace he gave her for their anniversary, how she asked him for permission before buying groceries. She wasn't just nervous, she was trapped, suffocating under the weight of his control. "Say you're sorry," she begged, her voice trembling, her eyes darting toward him like prey afraid of being spotted. "Please, Juliana, for me." I turned to look at her, really look at her, and what I saw hollowed me out. Fear. Bone-deep, soul-crushing fear. Not for me, but for herself. The table leaned closer, their hunger for my humiliation almost palpable. Lauren angled her phone slightly, recording, eager to capture my downfall. Aunt Victoria's head lifted higher, her approval of my mother's plea clear. "That's right, Elaine," she said loudly, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "Some of us still understand a woman's greatest achievement is her family." Brandon clinked his glass, grinning. Here. Even one of my father's associates chuckled quietly into his drink. They weren't just witnesses, they were participants in this public execution. But I didn't cry. I didn't fold. Something inside me hardened. For years I had carried every insult like a stone in my chest, believing the silence made me weak. But silence had forged me. Silence had been my shield, my cover, the mask behind which I prepared. 7 months of silence. 7 months of collecting, documenting, building my arsenal. They thought quiet meant surrender. They didn't know quiet could mean war. "Stand up, Juliana." My father's voice cracked like a whip across the room, demanding obedience. My mother's grip on my arm tightened. Her lips moved silently. "Please." And in that moment, as I met her eyes, I understood everything. This wasn't just about me. This was about her, about decades of submission, about a woman erased by fear. She had begged me to bend because she had never been allowed to stand. "What are you so afraid of, Mom?" I whispered. She flinched, recoiling like I'd struck her. "I just want everyone to have a nice evening," she murmured, her voice empty, her eyes betraying the truth. Richard Hayes slammed his glass on the table, the crack echoing through the room like thunder. "Now, stand and toast your cousin. Prove to this family what I've always said, you are nothing." The room hushed, waiting, savoring the moment. Lauren's lips curled into a triumphant smile. Brandon leaned forward, eager. Aunt Victoria sat on the edge of her chair. Even the Harringtons stopped pretending to eat. I rose slowly, my phone still in my hand. My heart wasn't racing with fear, it was beating with anticipation. And for the first time that evening, I let the corner of my mouth curl upward into a smile. Not the smile of surrender. The smile of someone who had already written the ending. Richard Hayes had no idea. The quietest person at the table wasn't weak. She was ready. And the storm was coming. The scrape of my father's chair against the polished floor cut through the silence. The sound grating, deliberate, like the start of an execution. He stood tall, glass in hand, his face flushed with alcohol and the thrill of cruelty. "Since my daughter refuses to show respect," Richard Hayes announced, his voice dripping with disdain, "perhaps it's time to teach her a real lesson, one she won't forget." His hand slipped into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone with a flourish, as though even his cruelty required a stage. "I spoke with my lawyer last week. We finalized some changes. Estate planning, you could call it. Legacy adjustments." The table leaned forward, hungry. Lauren's eyes glittered like a child about to unwrap a gift. Brandon straightened in his chair, smugness painted across his face. Aunt Victoria clasped her hands, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. My mother froze mid-step, a serving spoon trembling in her grip. Richard scrolled casually, savoring the moment. The Hayes family trust, the investment properties, the portfolio I've built over 30 years, none of it will be wasted on someone who spits on family values. Lauren and Brandon will be the primary beneficiaries now. They're building something real, something lasting. Unlike you, Juliana, who has chosen career over family, selfishness over legacy. Lauren gasped dramatically, though I could see the rehearsed delight on her face. Brandon raised his glass in a small toast, his smirk unshakable. Aunt Victoria whispered, "Finally, Richard. You've done the right thing, loud enough for me to hear." The words were meant to break me. Instead, they burned into me like fuel. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every attempt to erase me was stacking higher, transforming into something far sharper than pain. Richard's gaze pinned me like a hawk pinning prey. "You are no longer entitled to what I've built. You are barely family anymore. Just a disappointment carrying my last name." His voice cracked like a whip, each word meant to leave a scar. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I didn't need to check it, I knew what it said. The signal I'd been waiting for. "Everything is ready. Your call." My mother's chair scraped against the floor as she rose suddenly, her movements jerky, unnatural. She reached for plates that didn't need clearing, her hands shaking. "I just thought we might move to dessert." "Sit down, Elaine." My father's voice cut her off. She froze. "The help can clear later." His words weren't just dismissive, they were a slap in the face, a public reminder of her place. She sank back into her seat like a marionette with its strings cut, her face pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Richard took another long sip of whiskey, his chest puffed out with the self-importance of a man who thought he had won. "Your mother understands her place. She's grateful for what I provide. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. She doesn't have delusions about independence." My mother's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. My father chuckled darkly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "That's how a real marriage works. The man provides, the woman appreciates. Simple. But then we have Juliana, 30 years old. Barren, alone, still thinking spreadsheets and meetings make a life." He lifted his glass again, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us raise a glass to real family. To Lauren and Brandon, the future. The ones who understand their purpose." Crystal lifted around the table, obedient, complicit. The sound of clinking glass cut through me like knives. My mother's eyes watered. Lauren smiled so wide it almost split her face. Brandon's smirk deepened. Aunt Victoria gave a sharp nod, satisfaction radiating from her. And I sat still, my hand resting lightly on the manila folder beside me, my phone warm against my palm. 7 months of silence. 7 months of careful planning. 7 months of watching and waiting while they sharpened their cruelty. Richard Hayes had no idea that every smug word, every glass raised, every insult aimed to crush me was nothing more than a drumbeat to my moment. He thought he had stripped me of power. He thought I was cornered, exposed, humiliated. But storms are not broken by thunder. Storms break when lightning strikes. I lifted my gaze and let him see my smile, small and deliberate. For the first time all evening, he faltered, confusion flickering across his face. He thought he'd silenced me. He didn't know I'd been waiting. And he was about to find out what silence had taught me. The weight of silence pressed down on the room, heavy and expectant. My father stood there like a king delivering a final decree, convinced that he had crushed me once and for all. Around him, glasses glimmered in the chandelier's light, raised high in celebration of my humiliation. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for the collapse, the apology, the surrender. But I didn't break. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scrape against the hardwood echoed like a warning. Richard Hayes smirked, mistaking movement for compliance. "Finally," he boomed, his voice carrying over the table. "A little respect. Go on, Juliana. Toast your cousin. Admit you're nothing. Admit she's everything you're not." Lauren's smirk widened, her phone tilted slightly to capture what she thought would be my final disgrace. Brandon leaned forward, anticipation in his eyes. Aunt Victoria sat straighter, her breath shallow with excitement, already savoring the gossip she'd spread the next morning. But I didn't lift my glass. Instead, I set my phone face up on the table. The screen glowed. A simple notification lighting it. Transfer complete. All systems ready. My heart beat steady, not with fear but with clarity. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I'll do better than a toast," I said calmly, my voice slicing through the air. "I'll tell you a story. About success, real success." Confusion rippled across the table. My father's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "What nonsense are you?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick manila folder, its weight heavy in my hands, the culmination of 7 months of patience and precision. The sound of the clasp snapping open was sharp, final. I laid the documents across the polished table, page after page sliding into the center like cards in a game only I knew how to play. Brandon frowned, leaning closer. Lauren's laugh caught in her throat. Even Aunt Victoria blinked. Uncertain. My father's eyes narrowed. But his voice boomed again, desperate to reassert control. "Sit down, Juliana. Enough of this performance." "This isn't a performance, Dad," I said, my tone flat but my words steady. "This is truth." I pulled the first page free and held it up for everyone to see. "Do you remember that night in March? You came home from Miami, drunk on champagne, bragging about some big deal you had closed. You shoved papers in front of me, insisted I help you with the fine print. Do you remember?" His jaw clenched. For the first time, he didn't answer. "You signed everything I put in front of you. Trust arrangements, power of attorney documents, transfers you were too arrogant to read." I let the words hang in the air, then dropped the paper onto the table. "Your signature is on every page." Gasps rippled down the table. Karen Harrington leaned forward, her hand pressed to her chest. Bill's eyes flicked quickly from the documents to my father's face, his expression darkening. Richard's voice dropped low, sharp, dangerous. "You tricked me." I smiled coldly. "No, Dad. You tricked yourself. You were careless. You were arrogant. You signed without reading, because you assumed I was too insignificant to matter." Lauren shifted uneasily, glancing at Brandon. Aunt Victoria frowned, confusion clouding her smugness. My mother sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes darting between me and the papers as if trying to make sense of it all. I pulled out another document, this one stamped with the letterhead of a bank. March 15th, $50,000. April 3rd, $30,000. From May through September, another $120,000. All withdrawn from the joint investment account you share with Mom. My mother's gasp was audible. She shook her head, trembling. "Joint account? Richard, Yes," I said, my eyes on her, not him. "The one requiring dual signatures for withdrawals over 10,000. Unless, of course, someone has power of attorney." Richard slammed his hand on the table, the glasses rattling violently. "Enough! You will not embarrass me in my own home." "Embarrass you?" My laugh was sharp, bitter. "Like you embarrassed me tonight? Like you've humiliated me my entire life? No, Dad. This isn't embarrassment. This is accountability." I slid another paper across the table, a bank statement with highlighted transactions. All that money went to one account, the lease for a luxury apartment on Riverside Drive, Unit 12, B, rented by a woman named Samantha Lewis, 28, personal trainer, met her at your gym. The room went silent. Then Lauren let out a small, involuntary gasp. Brandon muttered something under his breath. My mother rose shakily to her feet, her face ashen, her hands trembling at her sides. My father's face darkened to a shade of crimson I'd never seen before. "Lies," he spat. "All of it." I reached for my phone, tapping the screen until photos filled it: receipts, delivery confirmations, snapshots of furniture deliveries, spa memberships, car lease agreements. I turned it around slowly so the whole table could see. $60,000 in furnishings, $8,000 a month in rent, a leased Mercedes, all paid for out of the Hayes family accounts. My mother's knees buckled, and she sank back into her chair. Tears welled in her eyes, but her face held something else too: recognition. Pieces clicking together, years of suspicion snapping into focus. "You don't know what you're talking about," my father roared, his voice cracking, but his anger didn't carry the same weight anymore. It was the rage of a man cornered, not in control. I leaned forward, my voice calm even. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And for 7 months, I've been preparing for this moment. Every transfer, every receipt, every lie, documented, dated, signed." I tapped the folder. "The paper trail doesn't lie, Dad. You do." The table had transformed. No longer complicit spectators. The guests now shifted in their seats. Discomfort spreading like a contagion. Karen Harrington's hand tightened around her husband's. Bill Harrington's jaw was clenched, his eyes heavy with disappointment. Even the business associates avoided Richard's gaze. Lauren's phone lowered. Her face was pale now, her earlier triumph replaced by unease. Aunt Victoria's lips pressed together, her certainty unraveling. Brandon cleared his throat but said nothing, his confidence evaporated. And my mother? My mother sat silently, tears tracing lines down her face, but her eyes, for the first time, were locked on him, not me. My father's voice broke through the silence, raw and desperate. "Juliana, sit down. You've humiliated yourself enough?" I smiled, calm, unshaken. "No, Dad. For the first time in 30 years, I'm standing." The room was a graveyard of silence, the kind that crept into every corner, thick and suffocating. My father's face had drained of its smugness, replaced by a fury that barely concealed his panic. He slammed his glass down so hard the amber liquid splashed across the tablecloth. "You think this circus proves anything? You're jealous, Juliana. Pathetic. Making up lies to drag this family through the mud." I didn't flinch. I pulled another document from the folder, sliding it into the center of the table where the crystal chandelier cast its accusing glow. March 15th. $50,000. April 3rd. 30,000. Repeated withdrawals, all funneled into Samantha Lewis's account. Shall I keep going? Because I can. There's enough here to keep us at this table all night. Lauren's hand, still holding her phone, trembled slightly. Her once triumphant smile had frozen into something brittle. Brandon leaned forward, scanning the page as though it might reveal a loophole he could exploit, but even he looked rattled. My mother's lips parted as her eyes scanned the highlighted transactions. She shook her head, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "Richard. Joint accounts? You told me." He cut her off, his voice loud enough to make her flinch. "Stop talking, Elaine. You don't understand business." "She doesn't understand because you've never let her," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Tell me, Dad, when was the last time Mom bought something without asking for your permission? When was the last time she even saw a bank statement?" "Don't you dare. She doesn't know her own balance," I said louder, forcing the room to hear. "Because you keep her in the dark. Every bill, every card, every dollar under your control. A marriage built on financial chains." Gasps rippled across the table. Karen Harrington's hand flew to her mouth. Bill leaned forward, anger flashing in his eyes. But he stayed silent, letting the truth hang. Even the business associates shifted uncomfortably, their wives whispering in their ears. My mother's trembling hands clutched the napkin in her lap, wringing it until it tore. She stared at my father, her voice breaking. "Is it true? All these years? Was it ever really ours?" Richard's face turned crimson. "This is nonsense. She's twisting everything." "No," I interrupted, sliding yet another sheet across the table. "Here's your proof, Mom. 3 credit cards opened in your name, maxed out. $40,000 in debt you never even knew existed. And last year, he refinanced the house, pulled $500,000 in equity, and burned it away on his girlfriend." The napkin slipped from my mother's hands and fell to the floor. She stared at the statement, her breath coming in shallow bursts. For the first time, I saw the flicker of rage buried under decades of submission. Richard lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but I was quicker. I slid them back, my fingers pressing firmly against the folder. "Sit down," I said, my tone calm, unyielding. He froze, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. For years he had called me weak, invisible, a failure. Tonight, he was realizing that silence doesn't mean surrender. Silence means waiting. "You want to talk about family values?" I asked, my eyes never leaving his. "What value is there in betrayal? In stealing from the woman who raised your children? In parading yourself as a patriarch while funding a life with someone half your age?" Aunt Victoria finally broke her silence, her voice shrill. "Enough of this melodrama. You've always been dramatic, Juliana. Twisting things. Richard has sacrificed everything for this family. And you... Sacrifice?" My laugh was sharp, bitter. "If sacrifice means draining accounts, forging signatures, and humiliating your own daughter in front of strangers, then yes, he's the greatest martyr alive." Victoria's face flushed red, her mouth opening, but no sound came out. Even she couldn't spin the evidence lying in plain sight. My father's hand trembled as he reached for his phone, fingers fumbling against the screen. He tried to mask it with bravado, but the cracks were spreading. His empire wasn't just crumbling, it was imploding in real time, and everyone could see it. "Check your banking app," I said softly, almost gently. "Any of them. Go ahead." He glared at me, but his fingers moved across the glass anyway. The room watched in breathless silence as his expression shifted from fury to confusion, then to raw, unfiltered panic. He swiped frantically, opening app after app. But each screen showed the same thing: empty balances, frozen assets, inaccessible accounts. "What did you do?" His voice was ragged now, stripped of its authority. I leaned back in my chair, letting him stew in the silence. "I didn't do anything tonight, Dad. I did it months ago. Every contract, every transfer, every signature you handed me drunk and arrogant. You gave me the keys to everything. I simply locked the doors behind you." The color drained from his face. For the first time, Richard Hayes looked small. "You can't," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You wouldn't." "Line. I already have," I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any insult he had ever thrown at me. Around the table, the witnesses shifted uncomfortably, caught between fascination and horror. Lauren's diamond ring no longer looked like a trophy, it looked like a mockery. Brandon's smirk had vanished. Aunt Victoria sat frozen, speechless. My mother exhaled shakily, her hand pressing to her chest as though trying to hold her heart in place. But her eyes, watery and red, were locked on him now with something I had never seen before: clarity. Richard's shoulders sagged. His empire, his power, his identity, it was all slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. And I wasn't done yet. The silence wrapped around him like chains, his breathing shallow, his fingers still swiping desperately at his phone as though one more refresh would change the inevitable. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but none came. The business associates avoided his gaze. Lauren stared down at her untouched dessert. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and even Aunt Victoria's sharp tongue had been cut short by shock. The only sound was the soft, uneven sob of my mother, her tears dripping onto the tablecloth like water stains that would never wash away. "You think you're clever," Richard rasped finally, his voice stripped of its booming authority. "Moving numbers around, playing accountant. That's all this is, Juliana. Childish games with spreadsheets." I leaned forward, meeting his desperate glare with calm precision. "Do you want to know what I actually do with those spreadsheets?" My eyes shifted to Bill Harrington, who had been sitting quietly, studying the documents in front of him. "Bill, you've worked in corporate finance. Tell me, what position oversees a $500 million portfolio at Morrison Industries?" Bill blinked, realization dawning in his eyes. His lips parted, but he hesitated, almost unwilling to be the one to say it. "That would be... Sweet? A senior executive. Chief Financial Officer." Richard's laugh was harsh, forced, hollow. "You're lying. She's lying. She's always been an analyst." I told you all she wastes her life on meaningless work. Bill was already pulling out his phone, his fingers moving quickly, his brow furrowing as he read. He looked up, his expression stunned. Richard, she's not lying. He turned the phone for the table to see. There's a press release. Morrison Industries. January, Juliana Scott, youngest CFO in company history. The words detonated in the room. Gasps rippled like waves crashing against the polished wood. Lauren's mouth fell open. Her diamond ring froze in midair as though even it had lost its shine. Brandon's glass slipped from his hand, red wine bleeding across the tablecloth like a spreading wound. Aunt Victoria blinked rapidly, her lips opening and closing without sound, as though language had abandoned her. My father's face went pale, the color draining as though the very foundation of his reality had been ripped from under him. No. No. No one would. His voice broke. Why didn't you say anything? He tilted me hell, calm, deliberate. When exactly should I have said it? Between your lectures about my biological clock? During your little speeches about how I was nothing without a husband? Or maybe while you were too busy mocking me in front of strangers to ever ask who I really was? My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her tears spilling faster. Since January, she whispered, her voice barely audible. All this time? Yes, I said softly, turning to her. Since my 30th birthday. The board approved it unanimously. While he was busy calling me a failure, I was signing a 7-figure salary contract and stock options he couldn't even imagine. The room erupted again, this time not with laughter but with the sound of shifting chairs, stunned gasps, and whispered disbelief. The business associates leaned forward, suddenly interested, suddenly calculating the new hierarchy unfolding before them. Karen Harrington pressed her hand over her chest, murmuring, "My God." Then, Richard stumbled back a step, his hand clutching the table for balance. You can't. You can't just." His voice faltered, weak, almost childlike. "I can," I said, my voice sharp and clear. "And I have. For 7 months, while you strutted around bragging about your empire, you've been living on money I allowed you to touch. You've been dining on the mercy of the daughter you called a disappointment." No. Lauren let out a small, strangled laugh, but it sounded more like disbelief than amusement. "You're serious," she whispered. "You've been CFO this whole time?" I turned my gaze on her, steady and unblinking. "Yes. And every time you laughed at me, every time you clinked your glass to my humiliation," I remembered. And I waited. Brandon cleared his throat, his voice low, uncertain. This paperwork. The signatures. It's binding. If she had witnesses. 2 senior executives from Morrison Industries. I cut in smoothly. They were at the restaurant that night in March when he was too drunk to hold a pen straight. They notarized every page, every contract, every authority transfer. All perfectly legal. Richard lunged suddenly, his hands reaching for the folder, for my phone, for anything he could tear from me. But before he could reach me, Bill Harrington stepped between us, his voice sharp. "Sit down, Richard. It's over." My father's chest heaved, his eyes wild. "She's my daughter. She can't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said coldly. "I simply stopped protecting you. You did this to yourself." His phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting with messages he didn't want to see. I nodded toward it. "Go ahead, call your lawyer, call your bank, call anyone. They'll tell you the same thing. Your accounts are frozen, your assets transferred. The empire you thought you built is gone." He snatched the phone up, dialing frantically, muttering into the receiver. Within seconds, his expression crumbled as he listened. "What do you mean, conflict of interest?" "She's my daughter." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. "You have to stop her." He slammed the phone down, his hand shaking. The guests sat frozen, watching the once untouchable Richard Hayes unravel. The man who had controlled every room he entered was now powerless, stripped bare in front of his family, his friends, his colleagues. I gathered the papers back into the folder, stacking them neatly, my movements deliberate, calm. For 7 months, you've depended on me. Every payment, every mortgage bill, Every credit card handled by the daughter you said was worthless. Tonight, that ends. At midnight, all payments stop. Tomorrow morning, every card will be declined. The mortgage won't clear. The car will be repossessed. The country club will cut you off. You will have nothing. Richard's face was ashen, his hands trembling. You wouldn't, he whispered. I looked him dead in the eye. I already have. The chandelier light glinted off the documents, still scattered across the table. The evidence was undeniable. The truth was irrevocable. The patriarch of the Hayes family stood naked in his own house, stripped of wealth, stripped of control, stripped of the power he had wielded like a weapon for decades. And I wasn't finished.